don't think I'm very interesting. So everybody knows me as the Lavender Librarian, I guess, and this is my page many of you are seeing me on, and I'm thrilled to have everybody here. And I am a children's librarian. I'm the creator of Storytime Solidarity and StorytimeSolidarity.com, and I'm an openly autistic person, but I'm not nearly as interesting as our guest today, I swear. So thanks, Stephanie, take it away.
Oh, Kate. Hello, everybody. Okay, so I am from Library for the Kind. If you haven't been to my page, I have a Facebook page, Library for the Kind. I want to introduce our wonderful panelists that so boldly came to talk about themselves. First, I want to, I have to open my thing. I'm sorry. Okay, so first I'm going to introduce Margaux. Say hi.
Hi.
Margaux Wask is an autistic advocate, activist, and member of BC People First. They are passionate about disability rights and fight for greater supports for disabled employed individuals. Margaux runs their own shop specializing in eye-catching merchandise, including neurodiversity pride items. And you should totally buy all this stuff. It is so cool. Super, and I'm just going to say out of this description, she's a super talented, super inspiring, amazing person with a very cute cat. And you definitely need to check out our Etsy shop. Next, I'm going to tell you about Dani Noreen, right? Said it right. Okay. Dani is formerly known as the Punk Rock Autistic, which is super mega cool. The Punk Rock Autistic is a blog and consulting platform for neurodiversity and queer advocacy, ran by Dani. Dani is an autistic, non-binary, and asexual. They have been working with the disabled population for over a decade and as a mental health, social work, and care professional. Dani also is working on extending his reach further, including offering personal consulting, disability education, and assisting families, schools, teachers, and organizations to create neurodivergent friendly spaces and provide insight and education for these environments and care providers. And I will also say Dani has awesome, wonderful, beautiful news in the last week that happened to them. But I'm going to go back to Kate, who's going to show a couple of slides for Margaux has put together for us to introduce yourself a little bit further. But I really would like to ask also if when you are popped up, can you tell us when you were diagnosed so the audience has an idea with autism? That is not Dani. You got the wrong person.
Oh.
Can't hear you. You're on mute. Still can't hear you. You're on mute. Kate, you're muted.
Yes, I was saying how good I am at tech.
I see that.
I can mention when I was diagnosed now. That's okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm almost 34, and I believe that I was diagnosed when I was 27. So pretty late in life, at least, compared to somebody who's a child who's getting a diagnosis.
Do you feel like if you were diagnosed earlier that you would have we've done some of what you're doing now for earlier in life?
I feel like it would have been nice. However, I got diagnosed with almost everything that encompasses autism, but isn't autism. So like ADD, which is now ADHD, sensory processing issues, learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, all kinds of stuff, but just not autism.
Tell us about your entrepreneurship. Tell us about your business.
Sure. Let me just put my cat quickly somewhere.
Throw your cat away.
I don't know. I think the cat adds to the stream, if I'm being honest.
Too.
I think that
he was attacking me. So I design and I get help with some of my designs and sell mostly autistic, neurodiversity pride, disability related things, as well as like retro and vintage inspired items. And I also paint. I have over 80 items available in my online stores, shop retrophiliac.com and retrophiliac.etsy.com. So I aim to help people, or I aim to facilitate aiding self-expression through my designs. So I'm helping people express themselves and hopefully communicate with other people with my stuff.
Yeah, like take a look just for a second. Let's admire all of Margaux's work here since we've got it up on the screen.
Seriously.
I love all of this. I love the pronoun pins. I love,
Yeah.
that you can actually say you're autistic. I've joked that I wanted to get an autistic tattoo so that I didn't have to keep telling people over and over again. Disabled is not a bad word. Respect my personal space. These are things, I don't know. I'm going to definitely be doing some shopping in Margaux's store myself. So I hope everybody will support their wonderful work. And I mean, honestly, it's just stuff that you want to have as an autistic person or an ally.
Thank you. Yeah, I really worked hard on making sure that like I have a good variety and that I'm listening to feedback. So sometimes on my facebook.com/retrophiliac page, I will poll people and I'll engage with people in a conversation to make sure that I am giving people what they're looking for. And most of what I've been able to do has been funded through British Columbia Arts Council grants because there's no other grants available for me. So actually this upcoming Friday, I'm going to be going to our provincial budget meeting and I'm going to be going and personally asking some of our politicians for more funding or for programs for disabled small business owners because we don't have anything. We are actively left out of whatever money goes to help disability-related employment for people. And they're told that they can't fund self-employed disabled people. They are not allowed to use the money on that. So it's something that I really feel strongly about. And I feel fortunate enough that I can kind of further my mission through the merchandise and the speaking engagements and all the stuff that I get to do.
I want to say you just got a compliment on your disabled is not a bad word pin there, Margaux. So thank you.
Thank you, Lily Nicole. I really appreciate that.
So I would like to speak to Dani now. Can you tell me when you were diagnosed and also a little bit more about yourself, maybe anything?
Sure. So my story is actually pretty similar to Margaux's. I was also diagnosed at 27. I'm 34 now, and it seems like we have a little bit of parallel there in our experiences. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with ADHD and sensory processing disorder at 4 years old, and anxiety and depression as well. Kind of encompassed everything that should have been the most obvious of it being, autism from the start. Kind of They threw a bunch of darts and hit everything but that. It's funny. I was actually recently reading through a lot of my old IEP and like educational reports, and it's interesting going back at that and looking at all that information and being like, wow, it was right there the whole time. It took them forever to realize that. It's funny how I kind of came to terms with that. I self-diagnosed first around 25. I was working at a day program for adults who have kind of a myriad across the board of different sorts of disabilities in a vocational program. And one of my clients that I was working with was like, I'm really glad that I finally have like a direct support professional who's like me. And I'm like, oh, everything kind of started to connect from there and went in and got my diagnosis. But more about me, my experiences. For the past probably 15 years or so, I've been working primarily with the autistic community in education, in day programs, in group homes. And it wasn't until about a year and a half ago that I kind of took the plunge to start doing my own kind of work that I felt that is better suited for people who actually have these direct firsthand experiences, are better suited, I think, for like kind of leading the charge to create real change and systemic change for people like us. Because a lot of these programs, there's a lot of great things that exist. There's still a lot of work to be done. And there isn't a lot of self-advocacy and a lot of autonomy that exists for people who, are kind of in the fringes of the system. So it kind of inspired me to, take the helm and start my own work. Currently, I work as a case manager, working with the disabled population in Denver, kind of doing wraparound support and whatnot. And yeah, it's been been a journey.
It sounds like you both went on to, like you said, do your own thing. Did you find before you were doing that, you had problems with employment, maybe accessibility with how employment would have treated you being autistic?
Yeah, absolutely. That's always been a huge challenge for me. It's something that lately I'm very raw about because it's a really big challenge for me. And I think that the more that I experience myself like authentically, the more I start to unmask and allow myself to be more authentic. And in those climates where I'm forced to mask, that mask will eventually shatter. And I can act and play a neurotypical really convincingly for a couple of weeks, and then it starts to kind of deteriorate. Yeah, being in my mid 30s, I've never really been able to hold a job down longer than, I think the longest is about 2 years. My biggest struggle is the lack of accommodations and the lack of like understanding of neurodiversity between employees. And what I find the most challenging for me is that it's almost this sense of irony that I work with a population of people like me, and those accommodations have been available to an extent for the people that we serve. But when there's employees that kind of have those same experiences, they're not available for them. And I think that for me, it's been really challenging. And having the avenue to start working from home and start working on my blog and working on social networking and the consulting that I'm doing as well is giving me more opportunities to be more self-sufficient, self-employed. I think that there's a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges for autistic people and disabled people in general who don't have. We're not there in a climate in our culture, and we need to be, that that it views people as being fitting into a mold, and that mold doesn't exist. And the more that we force people to fit in that mold, the more that the mental health of our culture is going to struggle. The more that people are going to get burnt out. The more that people like me are going to fall through the cracks. And I think that for me, that's like the one thing that I'm probably the most passionate about, is helping facilitate and create a climate and a culture that is accessible and equitable to everybody, regardless of neurotype or disability.
Margaux, can you add to that? And also, can you add maybe if we're speaking out to people that are maybe business owners or employers, what can they do to better accommodate you? Let's speak out to them, and maybe it'll get somebody to open their eyes a little bit.
Sure. So in terms of that, I'll start that first and then I'll go on my employment journey afterwards. I think a lot of the time the problem is that a lot of businesses kind of utilize their disabled or autistic employees as a marketing tactic, and they tokenize us for profit. There's a local business here that I can't stand that has puzzle pieces all over their business, and it's my autistic child this and my autistic child that, and they kind of push out the voices of autistic people or the people that they aim to be helping. So they're doing one thing, and then the moment they get any criticism or feedback, it's like, well, you're not like my child, you're not my child. And so, for instance, this local pie place touts inclusivity and diversity and stuff like that, and they don't support their employees. They are actively increasing their bottom line, which has been admitted to, on the backs of people who they're using to say, oh, well, I hired this, so come to my store. But they're not increasing the minimum wage. They're not providing supports outside of work. They're really doing the bare minimum. So I think the thing is don't utilize your employees as a marketing tactic. Instead, involve them in making changes in the workplace and make things better, because you have that very valuable resource would be a person with a lived experience. So many people, I think, try to co-opt our voices, and oftentimes they use us. They use us like, it's kind of like holding up, an autistic person in front of you, almost as like a shield, being like, well, here's my autistic person, so like come and buy from us. And it's just like, this is why, for me personally, I am so strongly committed to funding for disabled and autistic people who are self-employed, to have the funding, to have mentorship, to have resources, to have a caseworker, to have grants, and all that kind of stuff, because, you know, even if maybe somebody doesn't have an idea for themselves, that's not to say that somebody else who is in the same position may have that idea and may want to work with somebody else in the same position. Like, let's create a disabled workforce that is self-employed and empowered to be self-employed. The issue with that, though, is a lot of organizations don't think it's valuable to fund self-employment. And the reason why, as far as I'm concerned, is because they can't benefit off of us in any way, right? If it's not going to benefit these big employers and these very billion-dollar corporations, it's more in their interest to figure out a way to hire in an accessible way, which may not be totally accessible, versus funding people who are going to be able to sustain themselves. And that's an issue I deeply have. Is recently our newspaper put out an article about this pie place and how she hires with diversity and inclusion in mind. But do they ever talk to a disabled person or an employee that works there? Do they ever talk to people who are doing this for themselves? Never. Absolutely, they never do. Because again, how great does it look when you're marketing yourself as doing stuff for disabled people and it might not be done properly? There needs to be independent audits.
Hiring people but not accommodating them. So.
Or claiming to accommodate them and not accommodating them in the right way, because a lot of the time I think people may struggle to verbalize what's going on and what may be wrong. And so it's easy to take advantage of people if you know that they may have the inability to communicate about what's going on. So of course you're going to maintain possibly disabled employees if you might not be getting the feedback about how they may not be treated well or how they might need more resources. So for me, you know, I want to lead by example with my business and with my advocacy, my consultancy work, my social media presence, because it's not just about me selling pins. It's about me proving a point, you know, like I want to show people we are autistic and we are capable. And then there's the whole other situation of parents who are not autistic utilizing their autistic child for other things, and that's a whole other can of worms. But for me personally,
and he's going crazy down there.
I just wanna lead and show people, like, not all of us need allistic, able-bodied saviors for our employment or for our representation.
For people who don't know, the word allistic means not autistic.
So can I interject?
Please.
Margaux is like just taking the words directly out of my mouth. It is in my personal life, and even on my blog, you'll often see me just ranting in tirades about this. I think that first and foremost, disabled people are exploited. We're used as inspirational. The P word, and I think that is a massive part of the struggle here. Is that we're lumped into we're looked as like the sum of our parts. Like there's just like this idea of like what we're supposed to look like, and because of that stereotype, we're all assigned to that, and then there's no progress made. And then for me personally, like with my own advocacy outside of my own like social media stuff, recently I met with a nonprofit here in Denver, and I helped them facilitate a sensory room. And for like some of their events, they're a folk music school here in Denver, and I helped them set this and facilitate the sensory room for people. And what makes me so upset is that there's a lot of organizations in our community who facilitate these events, and they're the ones who have all of the power to create these spaces for people, but nobody on their board is led by disabled people. They don't have autistic consultants coming in who have these sensory experiences. Like, I can help you help others, but that power is taken away from us. And I think that what Margaux is explaining is a perfect example of trying to get that power back to the people. That I think there needs to be some sort of unionization of the disabled community and marginalized. This is why intersectionality is so important. Is that just like the title of this, nothing about us without us. We if you want to have progress for people in these positions, you need to have them be the ones who have the power and leading the charge, rather than being a market piece for a business, you know, because all that is just capitalizing on the fact that they hire disabled people. But like here in the United States, I know a couple of you are in Canada, the minimum wage for a disabled person is like half of that of like a neurotypical person. It's like $3 an hour, and it's the whole idea is that like, oh well, they aren't worth that same value, so their labor and their profit is exploited because of the image that the stereotype holds, and it breaks my heart. And I'm glad that we're here discussing these things.
Want to add? Anybody want to add? That's wonderful. That was more than I expected. That was beautiful. Does anybody want to add any more to that? Kate,
Yeah,
do you want
sure.
to add more to that?
So I definitely agree with all that was said. And the issue is, you know, legally, at least here in Canada, they have a legal obligation to not discriminate against people. And I think that the funniest part, or at least the most ironic part, is we have a private organization here in Canada that is all about accessible employment. And the organizations that sit on the board are worth over like $57 billion. And the government just gave them a chunk of $4.5 million to create accessible employment, when you know that financially, whatever that may entail, which is never disclosed, they could cover the financial portion of that, absolutely no problem. But that chunk of money, that $4.5 million, can't go to disabled people who want to work for themselves. And there's this big sense of inequality. And at the budget meeting that I'm going to be speaking at this Friday, I'm going to be bringing this up to our politicians directly, because they were the ones that gave this organization money. And, you know, you're not legally allowed to discriminate. So why are there organizations called accessible employers where their slogan is hiring disabled people is good for business? They admit that it increases the bottom line. And meanwhile, like companies should not be legally allowed to use disabled people and say that they hire disabled people as a marketing tactic or at all. Like, you should hire inclusively, and not, you don't have to announce that to the world. If an employee wants to say, hey, my employer is incredible, they're accommodating me, they're doing an incredible job, I love my job, all my needs are being met, they're listening to me, that speaks more volumes than a business simply saying, well, we do this. And all the non-autistic, mostly white, I have to say, people in their suits sitting in a boardroom telling everybody, well, we hire accessible. Like, we have an accessible employment model. Like, excuse me, we're not hearing from the employees at all. Yeah. So, it's just kind of ridiculous that we say nothing about us without us, and yet so many people are literally capitalizing off, our backs. They're making money off of using us as. So it's just something that really gets under my skin, because I'm not entitled to literally anything. I'm not trying to sound entitled, but we need to fund disabled people and their ideas. Because if anybody's going to make the most accessible thing, who's going to do it? It's going to be the people that need it, not the people that think they know what people need. So don't use disabled people as a marketing tactic. Work inside your company to make the things happen, and let those employees be the ones who are doing the talking, but don't make them do it. That's kind of where I stand.
I want to speak up for the people that are working in the field or any field that feel they have to mask just to be able to work where they work. And I can't imagine the anxiety they go through every day having to put on this mask. You talk a little about masking, being autistic, masking, and going into the job force.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time? I kind of didn't really fully process so fast.
I'm going to talk about masking and going into the job force instead of would on an interview, for example, what it feels like, the anxiety somebody might feel that they have to hold this mask going into work every single day. How's that?
I think for me, if I look at like where I'm at in my life now, and I have been for the past 4 or 5 years compared to where I was, from like 16 to when I was diagnosed, and really kind of came to terms and understanding of like who I am. I learned more about myself through joining the autistic advocacy, and neurodiversity community online, than I ever did of like getting a piece of paper. Because when I got my diagnosis, I was like, oh, this is just the thing. But then like it took a couple of years for me to really process it, and then everything kind of made sense. And that was when the unmasking really started to happen. And I've noticed that like through unmasking and finding authenticity in myself, I found the true me that I had suppressed as a child, that was forced upon me to conform to this identity that doesn't exist. And, and whenever that unmasking has a physical manifestation, being, perseverative and repetitious thought patterns and talking and focusing on certain topics and, being hyper rational, logical, and needing to understand why for everything, and lack of eye contact and difficulties with communication, it kind of arose back to the surface. And going into an interview was really hard for me because I can't lie to people. And a lot of times in interviews, you have to sell yourself, and I can't do that. And I tried really hard and I faked it. And then when I would get into the deployment, they'd realize, oh, this is not the things that you told us in this interview at all. It's like, well, if I had been honest with you, it wouldn't have worked out. And if I worked for an employer that could take that authenticity and the honesty of knowing, I'm very self-aware. I'm aware of my weaknesses. I'm aware of my strengths. I'm aware of like where I need challenges and I need accommodations. And I think a rightful employer that is actually based on accommodations and compassion could take that and be like, okay, these are things we can work with. And luckily in my past couple of jobs, I've had really good experiences with that. But still, there's always this level of like, when I'm in a place of employment, for me, I can't speak for all autistic people. I can only speak for my own subjective experiences, but there is an onslaught of sensory overload constantly. For me, everything from the tactile like experience of sitting in a chair for too long and not being like, when I'm working, I can't sit still. I have to work in bursts. I have to sit down for 5 minutes, get up, do 30 laps, come back and do it. Flap a lot when I'm sitting down. Like I need to have headphones on. Sometimes I wear sunglasses when there's like fluorescent lights on. Those lack of accommodations are there. And the problem is that when I mask and I suppress all of that to conform to this ideal worker, the only thing that happens that is just depression. It's an assault of mental illness. I go down a rapid cycle where I get triggered into burnout because I'm forcing myself to be someone that I'm not, and that builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. And it could take a couple of months. It could take a year. It could be a couple of days, but that burnout hits me and it's like a car crash. And I went through it pretty recently. And I've actually been, up until just a couple of weeks ago, I've been out of work for 6 months. It took me 6 months to recover from 6 months of employment because of that, not having the accommodations that I needed. And they weren't anything, out of this world. Like I really just wanted a space where I could have a little bit of quiet and have the lights turned off when I work, and the ability to walk around when I need to, the ability to put on, some headphones and maybe put a sign up on my cubicle that says, hey, I'm processing right now. Please give me a minute, or please be patient. I think the hardest thing for me with masking too is that I go through situational mutism and like speech apraxia, where I can't talk. It's not possible. It's not going to happen. And that can last for a couple hours to a couple of days. And the antecedent for that happening is because of masking and because of burnout. And if those accommodations were made, that never would have happened. And when you're working, in social work, or you're working in retail, or you're working whenever, and you can't talk to people, you can't have a job. And those accommodations just don't exist. It's hard. I use AAC at times. I have a text speech app on my phone that I use to communicate with people when I lose the ability to verbally communicate. And it's just like those accommodations are there. So that masking of that pressure of needing to force myself into situations that are physically painful is really hard.
Margaux, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so my experiences are basically like, I've had some really great, like at least my favorite job was working at an art supply store a few times and, you know, being able to kind of like hone in on things that I can talk for hours about and learn, you know, learn as much about art supplies as possible and the way different paint works and all that kind of stuff was incredible. However, you know, what I always say is the only job, you know, self-employment is the only thing that has ever accommodated me fully, because as we know, most places have fluorescent lighting, and fluorescent lighting for me is like hell. It is probably like the worst sensory input. I mean, I'll go even into a store to go grocery shopping and I feel like I can't see after a while. You know, it's kind of like when you accidentally stare into the sun and you keep seeing the outline of the sun in your eyes and that's all you see. Well, even if I'm not looking directly at fluorescent lighting, that's how it's like. And I'm like, I can't see, like I need to get out of here. Then I start feeling anxious and overwhelmed and I start feeling like I'm going to have a meltdown, or I just, you know, need to get out of there. And so a lot of places of employment have kind of been like that. And I think the last actual job I had years ago, I got brought into the office and I got fired, and there was 2 people in there and the manager smiled while she fired me. I mean, I had provided her literature about, you know, being autistic, and I tried to make it so that they had the opportunity to accommodate me and they just didn't. And you know, I think if we don't have the chance to like go sit in a break room for a while and decompress, or we're forced to be overly social, is not great. It definitely burns me out. And I think people don't really understand, some people don't understand that like our social batteries, at least for me, are very limited in what we can do. It's so small. Like yesterday, I ran out and did some errands with my family, and I was going to come back to my mom's house and make dinner, and I was just ready to come home. Like, that's how it is. I have limited energy, and I said to my mom, I'm not going to be spending my energy on anything that I don't want to be spending it on. And working for somebody else constantly felt like that. Like, I was literally, I would say it felt like I was dragging my body and my soul was following. That is how it felt like for me, you know, like we're forcing ourselves to go, to drag our bodies to go do these things we really don't want to do, and then we have to deal with the repercussions of that. And if I wasn't able to go on disability, I would be screwed, because I would be forced to work, and I can't do that. Like, I cannot work outside my home. I would be probably like at risk of homelessness if that was the case, to be perfectly honest with you. And because autism is generally sometimes so invisible to people, because we have no physical, you know, technically most of us don't have any physical traits of that, people don't think it's real a lot of the time, or they think our mental health issues are fake. And I can't tell you how many deep depressions, like sessions of depression that I went into because I was putting myself in these super stressful things. You know, if it wasn't your coworkers, then it was the employee, it was your management. And if it wasn't your management, it was the customers. And it's just a lot of socializing, and it's too much.
Wow. I'm gonna go to the next question. Wow. You guys are like so impactful. You have no idea, really. I wanted to also ask a question combining a little bit. We all know we're seeing how much of an impact being autistic has in your life and your career. But what about also being queer, being on top of that? Do you feel being queer and autistic has a huge impact on your life and your professional life?
I kind of. I think that for me personally, my experience as being a queer person is completely correlated with being autistic. I think that my sense of identity as like my gender identity is linked 100% with being autistic, as being a non-binary. I use that term out of convenience, but for me, really, I don't feel like I have a gender. It's a social norm that doesn't make any sense to me. it feels like something that is just very nebulous and vapid, and it feels like very neurotypical, and I just don't get it. So I use that word out of convenience, but I think that like the term like audi-gender is probably more accurate if I were to use something, as well with like my own like being asexual, I think is also a big part of that. But because I was assigned male at birth, that is usually when people see me, that's what the assumption is. And in the work environment, I think that like for me being autistic, I'm very quick to call people out on that. And sometimes they can get kind of, offended over that. They're like, oh, I'm like I'm not upset. I'm just like letting you know, like, hey, I'm not a man, and I want you to like respect that. And I think for me, like in work environments, it's gonna be kind of difficult at times for people to deal with like someone who can be so blunt. I can be viewed as like abrasive at times, and that's like really not my problem. That's other people's problems. But I think that as far as like being queer, I've been really lucky to live in areas where I've moved a lot. I've had like 56 addresses. I've lived in 3 countries in like 16 different states. And I think that for me, I've always lived in areas that have been very progressive and very accepting to like the queer experience. Kind of moved there deliberately and worked in places that I knew that were going to be accommodating. Like my last job, I worked as a case manager, where working specifically with trans folks experiencing homelessness. So, being queer really wasn't an issue there at all. I had a giant pronoun button. It wasn't a problem. But I think 10 years ago, yeah, I think that definitely there was a more of a backlash of that. But also my coming out of my experience of being non-binary and being on the A spectrum I think is more of a newer thing within the past couple of years. So yeah, I think for me, it's not really been an issue for me. I think I definitely have a sense of privilege being male passing, being white. I think that a lot of people who are autistic and AFAB have and are like by POC have much more challenges than I do. So I definitely benefit from that privilege. But yeah, that's I guess all I can really say on that. If that answers your question.
This is it. You got anything, Margaux?
So for me, identifying with the word non-binary and being on the asexual spectrum myself has been kind of like newer, I guess, in terms of finding words for it. It's not a new feeling, but it's new to me to being able to be open with the words that help me express what exactly that is. As a child, I would only shop in the boys section at the Gap. Like, I realized that clothes aren't specific to the way that somebody identifies. But for me, I never felt like, I guess I just never felt comfortable with the terms like girl, she, her, that kind of things. It never felt like it described me as a person. And I feel very genderless, if that makes sense. I'm very neutral when it comes to, feeling a specific way. And again, I want to definitely say that just because somebody may wear clothes that may be associated with their assigned gender doesn't make them any less non-binary. So I just want to put that out there. So, I don't think that it's made anything hard in terms of like employment, because again, I've really only had those words as I've been self-employed. I think the worst thing that I've dealt with is somebody recently on LinkedIn invited me to a very female-centric business networking group or something, and they were in France, and they had the audacity to literally ask me like what parts I have. And then I posted, just because somebody looks a specific gender or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that's how they feel or how they identify or what pronouns they use. And I had a bunch of conservative people getting very upset with me. I had people talking about homelands with certain countries and they're like, well, if I'm fighting for this, then how do you expect me to fight for what you're fighting for? I'm like, this has nothing to do with what you're talking about. And then even these conservative white men decided to repost my thing and say that like our future is doomed because of my status update.
Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, those people are the ones that don't matter. Those aren't the people that I'm doing business with. And I find that from my experience that anybody who I've dealt with who is neurodivergent, part of our, autistic community, for the most part, people are pretty open-minded, because I feel like, since we're different as it is, it's more of a welcoming place for other differences to occur.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So that's where I'm at with that.
There's something I want to add to that, and it's something that I've kind of pushed a lot on like social media, kind of piggybacking off of what Margaux is saying, is that here in the States, there's this emphasis when you're working around people to use like honorifics, like sir and ma'am. And I have a big problem with that. I think it's something that's antiquated in our culture, and I think should really be done with, because it presumes like an assumption of gender, and it doesn't matter what someone like looks like. You never know like how they identify inside, and I think that like if we continue the conversation about that, like on a larger level, and continue to tell people this and explain this, I think we can eventually get to a point where, like, I think younger generations are starting to kind of get rid of honorifics altogether because they're outdated and they're kind of useless, and people are feeling more comfortable to come out like being as queer, non-binary, or trans. But I think that moving forward, it's been something I've been trying to really push, is like to remove that from my mind altogether. It's like not to refer to anyone in any sort of honorific and be completely neutral until I know with confirmation what their gender is, because it's not my place to make that assumption. So yeah. Also, I want to applaud Margaux. We have a lot of shared experiences here, like a lot of solidarity between the two of us. So it makes me feel good that I'm not like alone in all of this. So thank you for sharing everything that you shared.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
It's
nice to have the shared experiences, and also all our lovely people in the comments who have been chiming in. I also appreciate that they too, also can relate to us a lot. So that's great. Well, it's not great as to the horrible things that have happened, but having that solidarity is comforting.
I have one more topic to bring up, but if anybody has questions, they can start putting them in the comments now. So the last thing I just want to say, what is your opinion on the term autistic culture? Do you feel it's a valid term?
Do you want me to go first again? Looks like that's kind of
Stand first. Flip a coin.
Okay. So this is something that I've talked about a lot, like in my personal life, and I think that autistic culture is absolutely a thing. I think that like Margaux, like just explaining like a lot of the shared like experiences and identities that I have is like it's super common. I read recently there was a poll, like I don't have the source on the top of my head, but there's like, I mean, it was like 80%, around 80% of autistic people like identify as queer in some way. There's a lot of crossover, a lot of correlation. And I think that really kind of ties down to like how our minds are not really subject to a lot of the conditioned states and social, like and the conditioned like social norms and roles that we have, that creates a sense of solidarity because we're not kind of in that same line and like conveyor belt kind of culturally as the norm. I think it does create like a subculture of some kind. And I think that like the more that I've worked in my advocacy, the more that I've like networked and talked to other advocates and more autistic people, the more I'm finding more common ground than I've ever felt in my entire life. I've always been someone who's like been kind of on, it's kind of the punk rock kind of thing, is like part of the DIY ethos and kind of doing it all myself is something that's always been, I've never had a really large group of friends. I've always kind of been a very solitary hermit person. When I'm not working or I'm not out doing anything, I'm usually 80% of my time is spent alone in my house in the dark, because it's where I'm the most comfortable. And I think that like when I've met other people who are like me, it's been a huge like relief for me to find that solidarity. The whole reason I started my page, the whole reason I started doing consulting, the whole reason I'm doing what I'm doing under this platform is because of the community that I share this culture with. And I think that it's the only time I've ever felt connected to other people is because they share that with me. And I think that's in itself the definition of culture, right? So yeah, I definitely think autistic culture is very much a real thing, and I'm really happy to have found it and be a part of it.
I can relate to a lot of that. I think that, when I did get my diagnosis, even though I want to very plainly say that self-diagnosis is valid, for me, having it on that piece of paper, which again is a huge privilege, and I know that it's not accessible to get a assessment, so that's a thing. But knowing that I was autistic and finding other autistic people online gave me this sense of like relief and belonging, which I never had at any other point in my life. It was always, why are you so weird? Why are you so different, by the kids around me, and being picked on for being emotionally sensitive and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, when you find a group of people that you relate to, that is totally a sense of culture, because you're sharing so many experiences. And if you're not sharing experiences, I feel like there's a greater sense of understanding and openness to learning. And I also want to add that a lot of people appropriate autistic culture, which is something I was going hard about in April, which was Autism Acceptance Month, or awareness for the people that are kind of against us. And what I found, and what was a big point that I made, is so many people, especially on Twitter, were posting these blue puzzle piece shirts that they bought from non-autistic people. And I was like, those are people appropriating like the wrong side of autistic culture. And if you want to support autistic people directly and you want to show us that you support us, opt for the neurodiversity symbol or the gold infinity. Buy your items from autistic people, which should, honestly, to me, that's common sense. How is that not common sense? Buy from any other culture. If you want to just support them, you buy from them. You don't take their culture and you spew it off as your own when you don't even relate to that. And, you know, so many people were doing that. I have the group Made by Autistics Marketplace and Made by Autistics Community, and I made a push to get people to go to the marketplace and buy from autistic people. Buy your shirts from an autistic person. Don't appropriate our culture. So it was frustrating.
I love how passionate you both are. Seriously. It's just like, I feel the energy, the passion. I love this.
Well, I think that also comes from part of autistic cultures. I think that autistic people naturally have a higher sense of like justice and like desire to change the world. I think it's because of the way that our minds work, is that we see things as like that gray area. Doesn't really, it's like no, this is like morally reprehensible. Why are people doing this? Why are they accepting this? Like it's just, it blows my mind every day when I see things, and I'm like, I share this with autistic people. It's like, I find, like, I don't think it's like an echo chamber, but I do think that there's like a sense, like politically, economically, and sociologically, like we have a lot of shared beliefs, and a lot of that is that everyone deserves, you know, to live an equitable and like life with compassion and have their needs met. And I think that partly that probably comes because a lot of us I've never had that. We've been left out. We've fallen through these systemic cracks, and that for us, it's like, no, this is not right. No one should have to experience this. And I think maybe with our bluntness and our ability to kind of just be very straightforward to things, my family says that I carry my soapbox around me, and they say that like it is like I wouldn't say insulting way, but kind of is like a gesture, like joking kind of way. But I think I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being opinionated and, you know, passionate about my beliefs. And I know that Margaux shares that same kind of mentality, you know, and I think a lot of autistic people do. And I think it's important that those voices are heard.
And especially we are speaking on behalf of the folks that may not be comfortable speaking, that may have different ways to communicate. And we are not only representing ourselves, we're representing such a large group of people. And I mean, I just think it's super important for people to listen to us and not co-opt our voices. Like, a parent of an autistic child who may not identify as being autistic is not going to have the same point of view as like an autistic adult. And people tend to forget that autistic adults exist. Like here, at least the autism funding is through the government is only for children. So what happens when that child becomes an adult? You know? So we have a very strong duty to represent those that came before us and those that are going to come after us. And I think people don't realize that for people like myself who feel comfortable enough to take on this heavy load and this almost heavy burden, that we're really just trying to make things better for other people. I mean, that's the goal ourselves, obviously, but I think it's so much bigger than just us.
Awesome. this is like perfect timing. We have 10 minutes. That's when I said I want to take questions. And we just got a question. Our first question is, how can an holistic person support an autistic individual?
So definitely amplifying our voices. So, you know, instead of like posting about us, reblog our posts. Let us have those words and let other people see those words from us directly. If you want to chime in or you're curious about stuff, most of the time, you know, if we have the energy and we feel like we want to answer the question, we will. But engage with people directly and amplify our voices. I just think that so often we are co-opted, and a lot of the time the information that's put out there by those people is wrong. And it's not in our favor. It's only to make them look good. So that's my piece of feedback on that.
I would add one thing to that. I think also when we're looking from like a business perspective, hire autistic people to if you're trying to create a network or a platform that like is representing disabled people, hire those disabled people to educate you. Hire autistic consultants to come in and like, if you want your place of employment to be like, you know, friendly, to market themselves as like neurodiversity, like affirming, hire neurodiverse people to come in to consult and help you understand what you're trying to do, rather than taking information you read online. Hire someone with direct firsthand experience to do that. So yeah, definitely amplify, definitely project, and not to take that. Don't take our platform away from us. Let us be the place to speak on behalf of what we're representing.
I have one thing to add to that is definitely if you are going to talk to an autistic person and you're needing us to consult, pay us and pay us fairly. If you cannot pay us and you cannot pay us fairly, then you don't deserve us. That's basically where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think that like that's the most important part, because a lot of us struggle with work. Like, pay us an at least a living wage, you know, like.
Right.
We're also really good at giving honest feedback. I know anytime I've been able to have the opportunity to do user experience for a website or an app or something, they are always so shocked at how honest I am about their stuff. So we will give you the cold hard truth, and we're not going to mince words.
We had a comment in the comments in the chat, and this person, they wrote, by the way, the name of this group is Giraffe Party. Hello, I love everything you post, so you should totally follow them on Facebook. You can find them. Make sure your space is accessible. In anywhere, you know, for people who are autistic, look for ways to make environments accessible, equitable. It's not too hard to change the light bulbs. I mean, it's really not that hard. There are simple things that can just be adjusted. Can you guys think of just small things, tiny little changes that could happen in a work environment to make things just a little easier? The easy things.
Fluorescent light covers. They're cheap. They're like $1.50 for like a pad on Amazon, and you can get them in bulk. That is, for me personally, a huge thing. Another thing is, you know, providing a space where people can go to like recharge. I think is really important. A sensory room, something that's like more conducive to put the. Let me pause. Let me go back to like my original thought here. Put the power in the person that you're hiring to be able to set the standards of what they want for their accommodations. Don't tell them what you're accommodating them for. Ask them, what can we do to accommodate you? Put the power back into that person. I think is the most important thing for me, anyway.
Anything else to add? Kate, was there anything else in the chat that you might want to bring up? I wasn't following the entire thing.
Oh, there's some great comments in here. It's hard to even narrow it down.
Tell us.
Can I just thank somebody in the comments quickly?
Yeah.
I wanted to thank Lisa. There's a lot of things about that. It's been comforting to hear us and see us have conversations like this. So, you know, I want to thank you both for giving, like, I know we're not done, but giving us the opportunity so that people can see that they're not alone. And I think that that's just a really important thing to do, is to have these conversations.
Giraffe Party had a great comment earlier I just loved, which is we need to destroy the idea that we can consult, that if we can consult on autistic needs, it doesn't mean that we're not autistic enough to understand the needs of autistic folks who have different traits. It's one of the things preventing holistic folks from taking our advocacy seriously. And the one thing I think that makes this extra true is I don't know any autistic folks who think that they alone understand everything about autism. Like, we're always consulting with each other. We want to amplify other voices. You know, I'm cis, so I want to hear what the non-binary perspective is. I want to hear what the BIPOC perspectives are. And I don't even think that, you know, I say it a lot, but you know, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So
yeah, you're not a monolith.
Yeah, we're really, really not. We are able to get each other in a way that maybe neurotypicals don't get us, but I think it's kind of the way they get each other. It's not like they suddenly know everything. So we need that diversity of autistic experience out there.
We have a question in the comments.
Oh, wonderful.
Leslie is asking, any specific tips for recovering from burnout aside from trying to unmask, which feels complicated?
Rest. Do everything you can to shut everything else off and take the time that you need for yourself. It doesn't matter any obligations you may have. The most important thing is that you're allowed to not do anything. You need to give yourself the space to heal and to rest, because burnout is sickness. You need to give yourself the space to recover from that. And I think that the thing that is most challenging for burnout is creating that space to be able to have, you know, me time, to be able to have that recharge. And that's the only way burnout's ever going to go away. And if you can find a support system that can help you through that rest, that's great. If you can't, you know, do what you can to create a little bit each day to give yourself that space and time to recover. Because pushing through it is only going to make it worse. It's only going to create that, like, it's only going to add to that weight. You're pushing back on something that's already resisting you. Just letting go and allowing yourself to be burned out, allowing yourself to be mindful and present in that, and sleep. Eat your same foods, eat your comfort foods, allow yourself to create a space that's sensory conducive, put control back into your environment, and allow yourself just to have some peace. That's what works for me.
I'd like to add, if you can possibly access neurofeedback, it's changed my life, but it's a very expensive therapy. So I know it's a privilege for many. And also working on your self-talk. Burnout can lead to depression if you think that your productivity is more important than your recovery, and your recovery really is the most important thing, and that productivity can't come without it. I also had something else I wanted to add, but I have already forgotten because I am nervous. So the question about how holistic folks can support us. Interacting with our content actually does a lot more than a lot of people realize. So comment, like, it's not just the sharing, it's the actual interactions. And follow, if you can, if you want to be an ally for autistic folks, follow a huge diversity of autistic folks on every social media platform you can, not just us, although please follow us, but follow, there's so many others that are just wonderful. Maybe, Dani, you could reshare your list later of all those great autistic voices on Facebook, because I'm sure if I were to try to list, I'd miss most of them, but there are so many wonderful autistic folks.
I do have a list, and I actually posted about this yesterday, where, or it might've been this morning, about how, like, I can only ever share my own personal subjective experiences. I can never speak for anybody else. And like knowing, like, to stay in my lane, and like how important intersectionality is. I never want to take the voices away from people who are equally or more so marginalized and disenfranchised. So that list I created specifically has a large amount of LGBTQ plus and BIPOC folks, because their voices need to be heard. And a lot of times the spotlight is put on white autistics, and it needs to be put on everybody.
We're coming down to the hour now. We have like maybe 40 seconds. Anybody else have any questions, comments, anything you just want to type into that chat, or does any of our panelists want to end with anything?
Yeah, does Margaux or Dani, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
Just that I agree with you, like interacting with us and commenting on our stuff helps our reach. Like I'm working on growing, my Facebook page and my social media channels and getting my stuff out there. So, even if you see something that you like of ours and you have a friend or a family member, share it with them. Like somebody said to me yesterday, I love your stuff. I'm going to share it with my family and my friends. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, thank you. Because the more people that know about our work, or for me, my merchandise, it might reach people that it can really help. So, doing that and kind of having that community and sharing other autistic creators stuff, we really appreciate all of that.
And I just want to say thanks for all of you pulling this together today and meeting with me. I'm really excited to be a part of this with y'all. It's always really refreshing to meet other people that have shared experiences and relate, and to boost and amplify the voices of the marginalized communities. And I think what you guys are doing is a great tool. I would love to be a part of this again if you guys ever do anything like this. Definitely check out everybody else's like pages and stuff that are in the panelists. You guys are all amazing advocates, and I'm happy to have the solidarity and space shared with you in the community.
We have one quick question, and maybe we can get this in before we close out. What is one key piece of advice for parents of young children identified as autistic?
I think Giraffe Party answered that perfectly. The Giraffe Party said, connect with the autistic community at large and listen to what folks have to say. Let's just listen to autistic voices. There's a lot of groups out there, a lot of pages that you can just talk to directly. Talk to every autistic child's going to be an autistic adult one day. Just, if you got questions, come to them.
Yeah, listen to other autistic people, listen to autistic adults. And also, I really want to say be receptive to our feedback. A lot of people tend to start arguing with us after they've looked for feedback. So just be receptive, be open to possibly changing, to personally evolving. That kind of thing, I think, is also something really important to add.
Yeah.
All right, Kate, if you want to, wind it all up.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for your patience with me as I figure this whole thing out. I've had just a wonderful time learning from Dani and Margaux, and thank you, Stefanie, for hosting. It's wonderful because I think that the more you see more autistic people, you see we're all different. We have some things in common, and the things we have in common are pretty cool, but our differences are also a huge part of it. And there's no one way that autism looks. And that's why we want to show as many different autistic